Here we go. Okay, so have you let people in? If you haven't, I'm going to tell you one more thing.
Oh, no, they're already coming in
Okay,
fast and furious.
so I'm going to talk about Carnegie and the steel industry for about the first 60%, and
Okay.
then we're going to move over to the libraries.
All
So
right.
the libraries are like in a second portion, but the second portion is completely libraries. And so if you don't hear much about the libraries at the beginning, that's the way it's designed, but it's going to be all libraries the second portion.
Excellent. So at what point do we start? It is 7. You want to give it a couple minutes or you want to start now?
Let's give it a couple of minutes. Let me see. Oh, 46 participants. I just saw that. Um, okay, that's good. So is Bigelow a Carnegie Library?
We are. Yes.
Okay, because I thought so, but I have a list of Carnegie libraries from Wikipedia in Massachusetts, and it's not on the list.
It's not listed under Clinton
Ah, oh, we could find out.
because there's a whole special Carnegie Library page called New England Carnegie Libraries.
There it is, Clinton. I'm sorry. There it is. Can you see that?
I can.
Okay, so let's do that and then do that. Okay, back to there. And there we go.
All right. So you think we're ready now?
Yes, yes, we'll
All
go.
right. Um, so I my name is Marie Letard. I'm the director at the Bigelow Free Public Library, and we are a Carnegie Library. And this year we are celebrating 150th anniversary as a library, although our library was built in 1903, so that's 120 years old. We got $25,000 from Andrew Carnegie way back then, and uh, this is co-hosted by additional Carnegie libraries: Ashland Public Library, Groton Public Library, Longmeadow Stores Public Library, and Marlborough Public Library. Um, Rick Feingold is an American business history professor at Bergen Community College in New Jersey. And he is going to talk about Andrew Carnegie. The first half of the talk is going to be about Andrew Carnegie and the steel industry, and then he will concentrate on libraries after the um, the steel industry information. If you post your questions and he sees them, he will answer them as he's going along. And but you can also wait till the end and ask questions at the end. So thank you, and this it'll be interesting to see if how many people are here because they also work at Carnegie Library. Um, okay, so thanks.
All right, let's get started. Okay, so I'm Rick Feingold. My specialty is American business history. So you can imagine that Carnegie would be one of the subjects that we would talk about. Carnegie, the steel industry, how he made his fortune, his philanthropy, and things like that. So this is really in two portions. The first portion is about, well, iron and steel and this how important steel is. And then Andrew Carnegie, as you'd expect, cover the Homestead strike. And then we're going to move on to his philanthropic vision. He gave away 90% of his money, and which is noteworthy because at that time there was nobody really setting this kind of example. He was one of the first people to set this sort of example, and then others have followed. There's philanthropists today, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, others like that. So we have our title slide here, and let's move on here to a few interesting topics. So this one is about the Pittsburgh Steelers logo. We had the first weekend of professional football this past weekend, and Pittsburgh Steelers obviously is a noteworthy franchise. The Steelers logo is based on the steel mark logo belonging to the American Iron and Steel Institute, created by U.S. Steel Corporation. The logo contains three hypocycloids or diamond shapes. So those inverted diamonds, they have a fancy word for it. They call it a hypocycloid. So if you want to add to your vocabulary, there's a new word for you. In 1962, Cleveland's Republic Steel suggested to the Steelers that they use the steel mark as a helmet logo. When the steel mark logo was created, U.S. Steel attached the following meaning to it: steel lightens your work, brightens your leisure, and widens your world. The logo was used as part of a marketing campaign to educate consumers about how important steel is in our daily lives. So as we go through here, begin to understand really how important steel is. We take it for granted today. We don't even give it any thought. We maybe have our own criticisms about how steel is made, but everything we use, or many things we use, are made out of steel. So that's what they wanted to emphasize. They wanted to really remind people about it because I guess in the early 60s, people also were taking it for granted.
Rick, I'm just going to interrupt you.
Yes.
Someone asked about the pronunciation of Carnegie versus Carnegie.
Okay, yes, I even make the mistake. So if you're in Pittsburgh, it's Carnegie. Maybe in your other places it's Carnegie. So, but in New York, it's Carnegie Hall. I've just gotten into that habit, but yes, Carnegie. Thank you. During the 1970s, the logos meaning was extended to include the three materials used to produce steel: yellow for coal, orange for ore, and blue for steel scrap, or the limestone used to remove the impurities. So there are three elements, as you see there on the slide, that are used for making steel. And that's why the steel plants, the ones of the past, most of them are gone, at least in the United States, were located near coal fields, or sometimes where the iron ore was. It seemed more important, or more likely they're going to be organized, obviously in the coal mining region of Pennsylvania, sometimes in upstate New York, other places. That's kind of how they got to be situated there. So a little bit about this history, things that, well, when I was learning this school, I didn't quite get it. Now, yes, we get it. The Iron Age began about 1200 BC. Iron replaced bronze in tools and weapons. Iron, when combined with carbon, is more durable and holds a sharper edge than bronze. Iron formed the material basis of civilization in Europe, Asia, and Africa for more than 3,000 years until replaced by steel in 1870. Iron is the fourth most abundant element and makes up 5% of the Earth's crust. So just quickly scan the sort of timeline of the different metal ages, with the Iron Age being a fairly lengthy age, going for what, about 2,500 years there. And then the Steel Age begins 1870. Why is that important? Well, with steel, we now have all the consumer goods that we enjoy. Low-cost consumer goods, goods that, now, of course, you just order it on Amazon or however you get it. We just take it for granted. Wrought iron was the most commonly produced metal during the Iron Age. The blacksmith would heat iron ore in a charcoal fire and hammer it on an anvil into the tool or weapon. Iron ore, when heated at very high temperatures, produces cast iron. By the Middle Ages, European iron makers developed a blast furnace, a tall chimney-like structure in which heat was intensified by a blast of air pumped through layers of charcoal and iron ore. Iron could then be cast directly into molds to make cast iron stoves, pots, pans, cannons, and cannonballs. To cast means to pour into a mold. So you just look at those examples of so-called consumer products or whatever category you want to put it in, and they were fairly a short list. But even though that was a short list of irons of goods made from iron or metal, whatever tool you want to use, obviously instead of stone, they were still quite in demand. So we have here on the right, cast iron kettle cost 1.5 million beaver at the Hudson Bay Trading Post on the Canadian U.S. frontier. So back in essentially the 1700s, maybe early 1800s, there was a lot of trade that I'm sure have heard of fur trading or the fur traders, and whether they are French or English fur traders. And they would bring these consumer goods produced in Western Europe to the frontier, and they would engage in trade. And there was a price list. And in this case, a cast iron kettle was 1.5 beaver pelts. They would obviously take the beaver pelts and manufacture hats. At that time, they were made from from pelts, as opposed to just cloth, as they would be replaced by. And that was the technology of consumer goods. So the technology is still not like it is today. And now we have an advance in technology in the 1700s. And then there's going to be another advance, of course, in the 1800s with a full-fledged industrial revolution. So this was the early portion of the Industrial Revolution, not in the United States yet, in Britain. Another important discovery in the 1700s by Englishman Abraham Darby was that coke, or coal baked to remove impurities such as sulfur, could be substituted for charcoal in smelting. This was an important advance since charcoal production led to severe deforestation in Europe. So we're going to see a short video here. And what the video is about this iron bridge. Now, I was in this portion of England about a month ago, just learning more about this iron bridge and the technology and the iron making in the Midlands, which is essentially the Midwest of England. And it's just absolutely stunning. So there's 3 generations of Darbys that essentially perfected this coke or this coke baking or manufacturing process. And up until this time, bridges were made out of what? Stone or wood. That's it. Never had been a metal or iron bridge or technology of this scale. So let me see if I can get the video going here. And is that going to do it? Hopefully it does. There we go.
Into the modern age, and his name was Abraham Darby. Coalbrookdale lies just 10 miles south of Weston Park, in the Iron Bridge Gorge, famous not just for its magnificent iron bridge, but as the birthplace of industry itself, the cradle of what's now called the Industrial Revolution. You drive through this gorge now, all you see are the ruins of blast furnaces, railways overgrown with weed, factories now converted into museums. Back in the late 18th century, though, witnesses talked in wonder of Coalbrookdale as a grim and fantastical glimpse of hell on earth, the night sky burning with the fiery glow of the furnaces. This place, in 1770, was a vision of the future. I'm in an old Quaker burial ground above the village of Coalbrookdale, the final resting place of Abraham Darby and his family.
He was a third-generation ironmaster, a maker of iron. His father was an ironmaster and his grandfather before him, and they were all Quakers, Christians, but outside the fold of the state church, the Church of England. And you often find it's people who are different who make a difference in society. They're the ones who cut through the tired old ways of doing things. They're the ones with the questing minds. And what the Darbys had done over 3 generations was to solve an age-old problem. How do you make iron fast, cheap, and strong as never before?
We'd made tools out of iron for thousands of years. And for centuries this gorge had been a centre of iron production. All the raw ingredients were here: iron ore, wood to make charcoal, water to power the bellows, limestone, clay. The trouble was, by the turn of the 18th century, the forests were being cut down for timber and farmland. Wood was becoming too expensive to use as fuel, and the one alternative, coal, produced iron that was too brittle. The race was on to find a solution. This is the Museum of Iron in Coalbrookdale, and this rather ugly roof here protects the blast furnace where Abraham Darby's grandfather, Abraham Darby I, finally cracked the problem.
Now, it's all pretty technical, but basically what Abraham Darby realized was that it was the sulfur in the coal that was weakening the iron. And so he tried smelting iron using coke, a kind of low sulfur coal. And on this very spot, in 1709, he produced the world's first ever coke-fired iron. And his son, Abraham Darby II, improved his technique, making the iron stronger. And here we have Abraham Darby III, inheriting the family business and putting this place, Coalbrookdale, firmly on the map by casting out of iron the world's first ever iron bridge.
It was intended, quite simply, as an advertisement. And when it opened for business on New Year's Day 1781, it became an instant tourist attraction. People came in their thousands to marvel at the astonishing technology at work here.
Here, at last, was a material, iron, strong enough to give substance to all kinds of world-changing ideas. Steam engines with iron cylinders powering machines with iron frames. Steam trains with iron wheels running on iron tracks. Nature now was our servant, and it seemed the world would never be the same again.
Okay, so that's what I do on vacation. I go to places like this to study the technology. But what was really interesting was they were telling me there that this area is absolutely stunningly beautiful in a very, very unique way. And the only way to really understand it is to visit it. But I was really surprised that there's all these bed and breakfasts there, and they kind of created a Williamsburg type of village to illustrate and educate, inform people about this portion of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, this is very much an English portion of it, and then, of course, the English technology will make its way over to the United States. Steel is more useful than iron. Yet prior to 1856, there was no easy way to manufacture steel cheaply and efficiently. The growth of the railroads in the 1800s created a huge demand for steel. The first railroads ran on wrought iron rails, which were too soft to be durable. On some busy stretches, the wrought iron rails had to be replaced every 6 to 8 weeks. Steel rails would be far more durable. Okay, so we have one more slide about this technology, and then we're going to move on to Carnegie. The mass production of cheap steel became possible after the introduction of the Bessemer process, named after the inventor, Sir Henry Bessemer. In 1856, Bessemer designed a converter with holes at the bottom to allow the injection of compressed air. One shortcoming of the initial Bessemer process was that it did not remove phosphorus from the pig iron. Phosphorus makes steel excessively brittle. In 1876, Welshman Sidney Gilchrist Thomas discovered that adding limestone to the converter draws the phosphorus from the pig iron, which floats to the top of the converter, where it can be skimmed off, resulting in phosphorus-free steel. This crucial discovery meant that plentiful ore could be used to make pig iron for Bessemer converters, which led to skyrocketing production of cheap steel. So starting about 1870 or certainly 1876, now you have the steel era. The steel era makes possible the Sears catalog and all the consumer goods that we find in the Sears catalog in the 1890s and Montgomery Ward catalog a few years earlier. Just an amazing variety because now we have cheap steel and we're able to enjoy all these different goods. In the US, in 1867, 460,000 tons of wrought iron rails were made and sold for $83 a ton. By 1884, iron rails had ceased to be made at all. Steel rails had replaced them at an annual production of 1,500,000 tons, selling for a price of $32 a ton. Andrew Carnegie's talent for lowering production costs would drive prices as low as $14 a ton before the end of the 19th century. At the same time, there is a dramatic increase in quality as steel replaced iron rails. From 1865 to 1905, the average life of a rail increased from 2 to 10 years. The mass production of steel has revolutionized the world. A brief list of products made possible by cheap steel: railroads, oil and gas pipelines, refineries, power plants, power lines, assembly lines, skyscrapers, elevators, subways, bridges, reinforced concrete, automobiles, trucks, buses, trolleys, refrigerators, washing machines, clothes dryers, dishwashers, nails, screws, bolts, nuts, needles, watches, clocks, canned food, battleships, aircraft carriers, oil tankers, ocean freighters, shipping containers, cranes, bulldozers, tractors, farm implements, fences, knives, forks, spoons, scissors, razors, surgical instruments, ball bearings, turbines, drill bits, saws, and tools of every sort. All right, let's move on to where they are making the steel: Homestead, Pennsylvania, and of course, Pittsburgh. In 1879, Andrew Carnegie built a great new steel mill in the hamlet of Homestead, outside of Pittsburgh. At that time, the town contained 600 people. By 1892, the population had risen to 11,000. Almost every able-bodied man worked in the factory. There were 3,800 employees, including the mayor of the town, who worked as an assistant roller for $65 a month. By 1892, the rural atmosphere of Homestead had vanished. The Monongahela was so polluted with waste that no microbe could live there. Still, cinders and dust covered the area. Even the trees were gray with soot. Hamlin Garland, a novelist, describes the scenes. The streets of the town were horrible, the buildings poor, the sidewalks were swaying, sunken, and full of holes. Everywhere, the yellow mud of the street lay kneaded into a sticky mass, through which groups of pale men slouched in faded garments, grimy with soot and grease of the mills. So if you want to learn more about this description or this article that Hamlin Garland wrote that was published, you see there the reference, in McClure's magazine, June 1894, is extraordinary. And you can find the article, runs 10 or 12 pages just by typing this into the internet, and it's going to come up. And you just print it out. You don't even have to read a book. You just read the 10 pages. It's called Homestead and Its Perilous Trades. Okay, so that's the reference. Let's talk about the hours of work. Life was hard in Homestead and in dozens of industrial towns like it. The men worked every day of the year, except Christmas and July 4th, 12 hours each day. There were no lunch periods, no shower rooms, and primitive sanitary facilities. When the day was over, the men trudged home for an exhausted sleep, perhaps stopping for a drink at one of the saloons on 8th Avenue. So let me just pause here again, or pause here, I guess, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was 2 days off. They didn't even get paid. I think it's 4th of July and Christmas. That was it. That was the working conditions. Now, of course, we're talking in the early period, the 1880s, 1890s. Eventually, this would be reformed, but it took quite some time. It took maybe 30, 40 years for that sort of thing to be reformed. And anyway, according to Garland, in the furnace room, he saw pits gaping like the mouth of hell, and ovens emitting a terrible degree of heat, with grimy men filling and lining them. One man jumps down, worked desperately for a few minutes, and is then pulled up, exhausted. Another immediately takes his place. Garland spoke to the men about the heat. They told him he was lucky. He was there in the winter. A modern historian of the Carnegie Mill describes some of the less arduous jobs. Pressure work in the rolling, blooming, and plate mills, as contrasted to hot jobs, was cooler but equally nerve-wracking due to the constant vibration of the machinery and the maddening screech of cold saws ripping through steel. In time, the men became hard of hearing. The din within the huge sheds forced them to yell to each other all day long. They and their clothes were covered with minuscule, shining grains of steel. They complained of respiratory ailments and drank liquor after work, as one man said, to take the dust out of my throat. Okay, so on the working conditions, we're going to see an excerpt from this video, American Experience. Now, many of you know of the American Experience series on PBS. This is from what I'm going to call the golden age, or the whatever people, promote golden age to the platinum age or something like that. Anyway, the peak age of American Experience documentaries. And so this is in essence when they're being done the best, I guess. At least in my opinion, they're the best. And I think you might agree. So this is from about 25 years ago. Now, take a note of this, because I'm going to show you 4 minutes. And hopefully it whets your appetite to see the whole thing, which runs about 2 hours. You can see this video on YouTube. Just type in Andrew Carnegie American Experience, and it'll pop up on YouTube and be able to see the whole thing. So we had a little technical issue here. So it's going to take me a moment to pull this up and get this timed properly. But I try to do it as fast as I can.
Remember, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A area.
Okay. I think that will, let's get this, okay. There we go, and there, that should set it up. Okay.
With E.T. a success, Carnegie bought another mill across the river at Homestead. It was a bargain, but it would cost him dearly. Homestead's new open hearth furnaces made it the steel mill of the future. Novelist Hamlin Garland would write of a roar as of 100 lions, a thunder as of cannons, a burst of spluttering flakes of fire, described fierce ovens giving off a glare of heat and horrible stenches of gases. Everywhere, the deafening hiss of escaping steam. I saw men prodding in the deep soaking pits, where ingots glowed in white-hot chambers. I saw other men in the hot yellow glare from the furnaces. It was a place into which men went like men going into war for the sake of wives and children, urged on by necessity. A man works in peril of his life for 14 cents an hour. Upon such toil rests the splendor of American civilization. The town itself was foul. Garland wrote of great sheds out of which grim smokestacks rose with a desolate effect, like the black stumps of a burned forest of great trees. The New York Weekly Tribune noted Homestead's lack of sewers and drainage. There are deep gutters on both sides of every street, but whenever it rains, the gutters fill up with water which stagnates and becomes covered with green, slimy scum, which sends up odors sickening to the extreme. This was home to thousands. The English speakers with the skilled jobs lived on the hill. They could look down on those they called the hunkies, the Slavs and Hungarians who did the dirty work and lived in the cluttered alleys by the tracks behind the mill. But like war, the mill forged a brotherhood. The mill was their life, and it would be their children's lives. There is a fascination about the mill, a sociologist wrote, against which even unwilling mothers find themselves helpless to contend. Something else made Homestead unique. Workers ran the town, and through their unions, they helped run the mill. The strikes, which had forced the former owners to sell to Carnegie on the cheap, would now be his problem.
Homestead was a workers' town, and the unions, the steel unions in Homestead, were very, very strong. Both the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers and the Knights of Labor. Not only were they strong, but they were bastions of, by 19th or indeed by 20th century standards, bastions of inter-ethnic solidarity. And there were a number of workers who had come to Homestead from the greater Pittsburgh area who were distinguished by their commitment to a certain kind of labor politics that made Carnegie and his colleagues quite uncomfortable.
Okay, so I have to stop it there. But as you can see, it's a very, very powerful documentary. Just talking about the whole labor issue, and let me get back to the our PowerPoint here and talk about the Homestead strike. Okay, and you may want to take a look at that book there and the description, which I'll talk about. The AFL had a strong union of 800 men out of 3,800 workers at the Carnegie Mill in Homestead, Pennsylvania. These men were part of the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, with 24,000 dues-paying members located mainly in Western Pennsylvania. This was one of the largest unions within the AFL. The union was faced with a demand for a reduction of wages of about 18%. Negotiations continued in vain during the first 6 months of 1892. In desperation, the union went on strike. In retaliation, Henry Clay Frick, Carnegie's partner, with support from Carnegie, was away in Scotland, closed the plant, and announced that he would hire a new labor force. So we have this real catchy title to the book, Meet You in Hell. And it comes from this quote: when the dying Carnegie proposed a final meeting after 2 decades of separation, Frick replied, "Tell him that I'll meet him in hell." So what this was about was we have the Homestead strike, 1892, and obviously this really hurt both their reputations. And over the next few years, they really had a falling out. Carnegie was kind of on his way into retirement, and he was unhappy with the way Frick was running the company. And eventually they had a parting, and they broke up the partnership, and there's these lawsuits and this and that. And then they were not speaking to each other, and they didn't speak to each other, obviously, for the next 20 years during Carnegie's retirement years and library founding years and things like that. Now, I think that is a stunning logo. It's Pinkerton National Detective Agency. We never sleep. Frick secretly hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency, an organization whose activities included labor espionage and strike breaking, to send an armed force of 300 men to seize the Homestead plant from the striking workmen who were picketing it. The Pinkertons approached the works by barge along the Monongahela under cover of darkness on July 2nd, 1892. To their dismay, the Pinkertons found themselves surrounded, rounded up, and marched as captives toward the main gate. After the march, however, the crowd of workmen fell upon the Pinkertons and savagely beat them. When it was over, 3 Pinkertons and 7 workers were dead. The victory of the workmen didn't last long. The Pennsylvania governor sent in 4,000 soldiers who arrived on July 12th. At 9 a.m., they surrounded the plant and within 20 minutes had displaced the picketers. By 10 a.m., company officials were back in their offices. Frick hired new employees and the mill furnaces were relit on July 15th. On July 18th, the town was placed under martial law. Then on July 23rd, Alexander Berkman, a New York anarchist with no connection to steel or organized labor, plotted with his lover, Emma Goldman, to assassinate Frick. He came in from New York, gained entrance to Frick's office, and shot and stabbed him. Frick survived and continued in his role running the company. Berkman was sentenced to 22 years in prison. After the Berkman murder attempt, public support for the strike was lost. Henry Clay Frick had the satisfaction of watching his men file back into the plants on his terms. Of the 3,800 strikers, only 1,300 went back on the payroll. None of the returning workers were union men. The few gains the union had won were overturned. The 12-hour day was imposed on all workers. Grievance committees were abolished. Extra pay for Sunday ceased. Labor espionage became an established practice. Wages were reduced by 20%. Okay, let me just see what's in the chat box there. Libraries. So, whoa, perfect timing. That's the next slide. So remember, I said so this is a hard break, and we're going to move on to the libraries. It's perfect timing. So, all right, so that's a Homestead strike. Carnegie would sell Carnegie Steel about 1901 to J.P. Morgan. He would retire. He retired to Scotland and New York, and he had different houses. So where did Carnegie live? Well, obviously starts off in Dunfermline, Scotland, moves to Pittsburgh. Eventually, he's going to move on to New York. His home is still there in New York on Fifth Avenue. I think it's 5th and 90th, 91st, 92nd Street. It's now a museum, so you tour the museum, you tour Carnegie's home. He has another home in Scotland called Skibo or Skibo Castle. It's in Scotland. But anyway, he's going to go on. We're going to talk about his philanthropic vision. The Andrew Carnegie dictum was to spend the third of one's life getting all the education one can. to spend the next third making all the money one can, to spend the last third giving it all away for worthwhile causes. As early as 1868, at age 33, he drafted a memo to himself. He wrote, "The amassing of wealth is one of the worst species of idolatry. No idol more debasing than the worship of money." In order to avoid degrading himself, he wrote in the same memo he would retire at age 35 to pursue the practice of philanthropic giving, for, quote, "the man who dies thus rich dies disgraced." However, he did not begin his philanthropic work in earnest until 1881 with the gift of a library to his hometown of Dunfermline, Scotland. The Gospel of Wealth, oh, there we go, wait, there we go. The Gospel of Wealth is an article written by Andrew Carnegie in June of 1889 that describes the responsibility of philanthropy by the new upper class of self-made rich. Carnegie proposed that the best way of dealing with the new phenomenon of wealth inequality was for the wealthy to redistribute their surplus means in a responsible and thoughtful manner. As a result, the wealthy should administer their riches responsibly and not in a way that encourages the slothful, the drunken, the unworthy. The Gospel of Wealth asserts that hard work and perseverance lead to wealth. So what was his vision? His vision was for meritocracy, and that those who essentially worked the hardest or applied themselves would essentially benefit the most. All right, you're waiting for the libraries. A Carnegie library is a library built with money donated by Andrew Carnegie. A total of 2,509 Carnegie libraries were built between 1883 and 1929, including 1,689 built in the United States. At first, Carnegie libraries were almost exclusively in places where he had a personal connection, namely his hometown in Scotland and the Pittsburgh area. In later years, few towns that requested a grant and agreed to his terms were refused. By the time the last grant was made in 1919, there were 3,500 libraries in the United States, nearly half of them built with construction grants paid by Carnegie. The first of Carnegie's public libraries was in his birthplace, Dunfermline, Scotland, and would open in 1883. The building displays a sun with a carved motto, "Let there be light," at the front entrance. So those of you who are at Carnegie libraries, I want for you to kind of pay attention to some of these architectural features that are supposed to be in all of the libraries. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but we kind of want to compare. So this library here, you see the library obviously in Dunfermline. So as there actually more than once. And the library, you see that's a black and white photo. I don't know when it is, but obviously it's long ago. And it looks like that today. They have updated it. They might have expanded it, but that portion of the building is still there today. It's been nicely updated. It's a real treat, and of course, Dunfermline benefits from the Carnegie connection. The first Carnegie library to open in the United States was in 1889 in Braddock, Pennsylvania, 9 miles from Pittsburgh and home to one of the Carnegie steel mills. So that Braddock Library, if you go to Braddock, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh, so if you go to Pittsburgh, you're right near Braddock, Pennsylvania, there still is that steel mill there that was referred to in the video in Braddock. It's a U.S. steel mill today. The steel mill is still there, it's still producing steel. And the Carnegie Library, in essence, the first in the United States, is still there as well. There's a photo of it coming up on another slide. The second library in the United States was in his hometown of Allegheny, Pennsylvania. It opened in 1890 and also contained the first Carnegie Music Hall in the world. Initially, Carnegie limited his support to a few towns in which he had an interest. Architectural critic Patricia Lowry wrote, quote, "To this day, Carnegie's free to the people libraries remain Pittsburgh's most significant cultural export, a gift that has shaped the minds and lives of millions." Beginning in 1899, his foundation funded a dramatic increase in the number of libraries. This coincided with the rise of women's clubs, which were most responsible for organizing efforts to establish libraries, including fundraising within their communities to support operations. So we just want to take a moment here to look at that last bullet point and think about this time period and the organization and the efforts of these women's clubs. So starting about 1890, we have what's called the progressive era, different from, although maybe somewhat similar to progressive politics, the progressive era where people in the community wanted to improve things essentially for the next generation, for the children. And they would obviously get involved in all kinds of community activities, one of which was supporting the library or building a library or staffing the library or even funding programs like this today. So that was the women's clubs, and they were busy at work during this time period, and we want to just remember them. Carnegie believed in giving to the industrious and ambitious, not those who need everything done for them, but those who, being most anxious and able to help themselves, deserve and will be benefited by help from others. So what does this mean? He believed in building libraries, maybe schools. His philanthropy extends well beyond the libraries. The libraries is the most visible and the most tangible project. But today, the Carnegie Foundation still exists and is well endowed and is doing good works more than 100 years after he has passed on. It survives, it grows, it's robust, and it's involved in many, many, many projects, just like the Rockefeller Foundation as another example. So he believed in funding things like libraries or schools or things like that. He didn't believe in, let's say, a food bank. That's maybe somebody else's project, but that was, he had this kind of vision. Most of the library buildings were unique, and each style was chosen by the community. The architecture.
I don't mean to interrupt, but it's timely. Someone asked, what were the requirements of a town or city would need to meet to get the library, to get the grant for a library?
We're going to come up to that. That's next
Excellent.
slide. We'll cover all that. Okay. Most of the library was unique, and each style was chosen by the community. The architecture was simple and formal, welcoming patrons to enter through a prominent doorway, nearly always accessed via a staircase. The entry staircase symbolized a person's elevation by learning. Similarly, outside virtually every library was a lamppost, meant as a symbol of enlightenment. In the early 20th century, a Carnegie Library was often the most imposing structure in hundreds of small American communities. So here we have a photograph of the Carnegie Library in Homestead, Pennsylvania, obviously where the steel mill was. Steel mill's not there anymore, it was torn down. Most of the Pittsburgh steel mills, about 90%, were torn down during between 1980 and today, I guess. Maybe the 1990s, they were replaced. So if you go to Homestead today, where the steel mill was, well, yeah, there's a plaque and this and that, but mostly that land is now occupied by a shopping mall and by condominiums, and it's been nicely redeveloped. But the library stands. The libraries, I remember what was the date? I might have mentioned this at 1890s. It still stands. And what are the architectural elements? a staircase, in this case, a prominent staircase. In all the Carnegie libraries I visited, there's always been a staircase. Sometimes it's a short one, 5 or 6 or 8 steps, and sometimes it's a tall one like that. But there is a staircase leading up to it, and there is some sort of a lamp post outside. So, as I asked you before, everyone that's familiar with the Carnegie Library in Massachusetts or any place, think about those architectural elements. There's maybe a motto above the doorway. What was it? Let there be light was an example of one. And inside, frequently, I don't know if 100% is a portrait of Carnegie. Sometimes it's real small. I'm looking at it, oh, what good is that? That's like too small. But you might see that there. Okay, so I was asked to do something. Now this doesn't apply, but I was asked to do something about the list of Carnegie libraries. So the way I do this, the way I kind of find these sorts of lists is I will go to Wikipedia, and then there's a list of Carnegie libraries in Massachusetts. And as we just kind of go down the list, I know one of the libraries participating tonight is Ashland Library, and the Bigelow libraries, of course, you see it there in Clinton. And if you go to this list, there will be, and you see the date granted. That was the date that, the money was approved and the grant amount, and of course the address there. Then there'll be a photograph. And then it's kind of very interesting as you go down this list. It's like, oh, I went down this list and, oh, academic libraries too. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Who would know about this? And I worked at Penn State University for many years, and there was a Carnegie building, and that was the former Carnegie Library. Mount Holyoke, obviously highly prominent colleges or universities in Massachusetts. Every one on this list is Mount Holyoke, Radcliffe, Smith, Tufts, Wellesley. You can't get a better list than that. So if you want to look at this in other states as well, it's very interesting. But this is, a nice resource for that sort of thing. Okay, yes, thank you, Tanar. Iron furnace still exists in Cornwall, Pennsylvania. Okay, yes, thank you for. Okay, we'll go through all that. But let me get back. We still have more of the story here, and so what do we have? Okay, books and libraries were important to Carnegie, beginning with his early childhood in Scotland and his teen years in Pittsburgh. As a child in Scotland, he listened to readings and discussions of books from the tradesman's library, which his father helped to create. Later in Pennsylvania, while working for the local telegraph company, Carnegie borrowed books from the personal library of Colonel James Anderson, who opened his collection to his workers every Saturday. In his autobiography, Carnegie credited Anderson with providing an opportunity for, quote, working boys, unquote, to acquire the knowledge to improve themselves. Carnegie's personal experience as an immigrant who, with help from others, worked his way into a position of wealth, reinforced his belief in a society based on merit, where anyone who worked hard could become successful. So in this image here, we have the front entrance to the Carnegie Library in Edinburgh, Scotland. And of course the inscription is "Let there be light," Carnegie's library motto. And it's just quite interesting because today we don't think about discovering our Carnegie libraries. We just think about the library, that we take it for granted. That's kind of the certain kind of progress where we just assume we always have a library. But you can, I've been walking around in Great Britain or Ireland, and I see an old library, and I'm like, oh, well, let me look at this library. Let me examine this library, and I find, of course, the old library was founded from Carnegie Library grants. All right, so the standards. Nearly all of Carnegie's libraries were built according to the Carnegie formula, which required financial commitments from the town that received the donation. Carnegie required public support rather than making endowments because, as he wrote, an endowed institution is liable to become the prey of a clique. The public ceases to take interest in it, or rather never acquires interest in it. The rule has been violated, which requires the recipients to help themselves. Everything has been done for the community instead of it's being only helped to help itself. Carnegie required the elected officials to demonstrate the need for a public library, provide the building site, pay to staff and maintain the library, draw from public funds to run the library, not use only private donations, annually provide 10% of the cost of the library's construction to support its operation, and provide free service to all. Wow. I mean, I think that's kind of the way it's survived this philosophy. So here in this image, we see obviously a postcard of the library, the first Carnegie Library in America, or the second Carnegie Library of the world, in Braddock, Pennsylvania, that I talked about before. It still looks like that. I mean, you can see that's an old postcard. I'm not sure, close to 100 years ago. And it still is like that today, except I guess let me look really close. Well, okay, we don't have a horse and carriage, I guess. But it looks like that today. It's a pretty big library for that kind of size of a town. And I think there's a Carnegie Music Hall, or it's kind of like, it's equivalent to a YMCA. There are areas there for, I think there's a gym and maybe there's even a swimming pool or something like that. Some of those have been shut down. Okay, a little bit more here. The first 5 Carnegie libraries followed a closed stacks policy. The method of operation, common to libraries at that time. Patrons requested a book from a library staffer, would fetch the book from closed stacks off limits to the public and bring it to a delivery desk. To reduce operating costs, Carnegie created a then revolutionary open shelf or self-service policy beginning with the Pittsburgh neighborhood branches. This streamlined process allowed open access to shelves by patrons. It's quite amazing. I mean, we don't think about this today, that in the past, the books were kind of kept, in a secret area, and you had to know the title of the book you're looking for, and then they would bring it out to you, and there wasn't really obviously a democratic type of access. Theft of books and other items was a major concern. Thus, the library circulation desk was strategically positioned just inside the front door. Bigger and more daunting than those used in modern libraries, these desks spanned almost the entire width of the lobby and acted as a physical barrier between the front entrance and the book room. While hundreds of the library buildings have become museums, community centers, office buildings, or residences, more than half of those in the United States still serve their communities as libraries over a century after their construction, many in middle to low income neighborhoods. For example, Carnegie libraries still form the nucleus of the New York public library system in New York City, with 31 of the original 39 buildings still in operation. So I have one more comment, and then of course we'll open this up. What is the one thing I hate about my library? Friday and Saturday nights, some Sundays, and all snow days. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about a library which is not a Carnegie library, but it's about, I love libraries, of course, and obviously the rest of you do too. And obviously, particularly in Massachusetts, it really stands out. So I just want to point out this library because this was just amazing. I never knew of a library, aside from possibly an academic library, to be open Sunday evenings. I never came across one. I know some are open Sunday afternoons, but 5 o'clock, that's cut off. I mean, maybe the main library in Boston might be, I'm not sure. So I am in Topeka, Kansas, not a place. I was there for doing different kinds of research. I'm not thinking about the library. I'm not expecting, just not thinking about it all. And I pull up to a traffic light and I look to the right and it looks like a library. It's the backside of this building and the lights are on. And I look at my watch and it's 6 o'clock. Oh, that's interesting. Let me explore this a little bit. And I drive around the corner where you see those cars are and I park. And I pull up and I look at the library hours that you can see on this slide. And of course, it says Sunday noon to 9 p.m. So you just imagine I'm absolutely delighted in this, not just because of the hours, but because what I'm seeing beyond those front doors. And I'm seeing the most extraordinary, exquisite design layout of a library. And here it is in Topeka, Kansas, maybe the last place or one of the last places you might expect something like this, but they got the library perfect. So inside those doors are, as you'd expect, a children's room, and the adult, it's not a room, it's just this huge, huge, huge area with these beautiful desks, all the nicest furniture, no, lack of budget here or there, whatever. Nice little lamps on every little desk. I mean, not just overhead lights, but the nice, soft lighting on the desk. And there's also a teen room and, of course, a cafeteria with hot food and an extraordinary bookstore gift shop with all kinds of things that you really do want to buy. And on that second floor is executive conference rooms. You see them all lined up there, many of them, which you can obviously book and have your own meeting in there. And to the back are the historical kind of, not sure what the terminology is for it, but the real nice, cozy historical reading room area with its own two or three librarians and the beautiful chairs, like you get in a 5-star hotel. So I have found excuses to return to Topeka more times than I should, so I can visit this library and maybe do a couple other things. So here is a documentary, the name of the documentary, American Experience, PBS, Carnegie, 2 hours, available on YouTube. There is my name, Rick Feingold. There's my contact information, rickfeingold@att.net. There's also my phone number there. And let me see what we have here in the Q&A. Did he require in the South to permit African Americans to use the library? So it's a really good question, and I really need to add another slide for this. And so his grants were to build the library. So he did not establish policies for using the library or anything like that. I mean, it just wasn't what he did. But there were certain Carnegie libraries that were devoted to the African American community. You can look it up. I have to do this, but I haven't done it. But there's a list of specific libraries devoted to the African American community that were devoted to that aspect. I wish I could answer it better, but you can look it up. I don't know. You have to find the proper keywords for it, and I don't have them at the top of my head. But there were some in that category. Let me see here. What else do we have here? Chat. Wait, hold on here. Let's see. Let's start at the top here. Libraries, iron furnace. I love the concept. Show up upscale community. Something beautiful. Okay. Yes, I grew up in a Carnegie Library in Thompsonville, Connecticut, and it is still alive. It is amazing. These were built mostly in 1900, 1920, I guess. Maybe, there's a few, the last one was built in 1929. So they're all 100 years old or more. What kind of buildings have survived 100 years? In America, particularly in the big cities, we have something we know it's creative destruction. We decide we want to use the land for something else. We replace, okay, fortunately, they haven't done that to Fenway Park. But, in every other city except for Chicago, they've done that. They replace the ball. They replace these things. It's just like the money interest. And these libraries, more than half, are still around. People love the libraries. They're dedicated to preserving the libraries. I guess they're on the historic register. I don't quite know about that. And over 100 years, it's an amazing project. Amazing, Okay, grew up across the street from the Carnegie Museum Library in Oakland, Pittsburgh. Worked all through high school in the library stacks from the Carnegie Museum in Oakland, Pittsburgh. So I'm not sure if you're referring to the main library in Pittsburgh or a branch Carnegie Library in Pittsburgh. I kind of think you might be speaking of a branch. I'm not sure because of Carnegie Museum. But if you go to Pittsburgh, visit their Carnegie main library. It is extraordinary. There are just certain libraries that, well, I love all libraries. Certain libraries, I just get goosebumps. This one in Pittsburgh, first of all, it's beautiful from the outside. It's beautiful on the inside. And for me, my favorite thing is to find a library and I just have the nice plush reading chairs. If I find a nice plush reading chair, I don't want to, I'll be looking at my watch. Okay, what time is it close? I don't want to just stick around there. So they've got lots of them at that library. I grew up in Ashland using the library every week while in middle school, worked part-time during high school and college. Wow. Yeah. I mean, a lot of us worked I worked in the library as well actually in elementary school. They allowed us to do things like that. I too worked as a page through high school at my town library. What a great job for a kid. Thank you, Judy. Wow, it's a lot of good comments here. I mean, the kind of comments that I know library directors and people like myself, but particularly library, I'm just going to warm your hearts. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a way you can kind of copy and paste these into, I'm not sure, your grant requests or something like that, but this is what it's all about. Worked at Edgerton Library, opened in 1904, and is the smallest of the Carnegie libraries. Designed by Edgerton, hopefully I'm pronouncing that, Evertonian, who was the clerk of the works on several projects for the man himself. Aren't the arch windows part of the Carnegie libraries? Apparently, yeah, they are. Yeah, these are, I'm not sure. Maybe we can cut and paste these some way. So we really want to try that. Will the presentation be sent to attendees? Let me hold that for later because I got to think about that for a moment. Yes, we'll send a link. Oh, I'm sorry. So there is that is a link to the webinar, I guess, presentation, the 75 minutes or whatever.
Yes. We did talk about this, and we are being recorded, and it will be sent out to attendees.
Okay, great. Yes. I believe it was built in 1908. Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. Being recorded. Okay. There you go. The main. Thank you, Mary. So Mary knows what I speak of. I mean, you just got experience. This is really, really good. What I like about it is it's across from the University of Pittsburgh, which also has some extraordinary, unique, one-of-a-kind buildings. I've been to the Ashland Library, and they don't use that grand entrance anymore because it's not accessible. Now you enter through a small back door at ground level. Okay, yes, modifications have been made. The Ashland Library closes the main entrance only during the winter months to avoid slippery steps and injuries. Or is it the Berkeley Library? Okay, that part I can't respond to. So yeah, so the thing about African Americans, there is something about it, and it's quite noteworthy. I've been think it's just on my to-do list and it hasn't gotten done. Um, so I'll work on task myself to working up that slide and adding a little bit more information on that. But you can look for it on the internet. Carnegie Free Library and Music Hall in Carnegie, PA, has, I guess you'll be writing a little bit more. Anyway, it looks like they have a music hall. The 9th Pennsylvania Reserves maintains and oversees the facilities genuine national treasure, the Civil War Room, the Thomas S.B. Post of the Grand Army of the Republic. So I'm sorry, that is in Carnegie, Pennsylvania, and I'm not quite sure where Carnegie, Pennsylvania is. I'm guessing around Pittsburgh, but I don't know. Maybe you have that information, because obviously the next time I'm out there, I'm going to want to look into that. I don't know. I mean, wow, that'd make a nice little vacation visiting Carnegie libraries. Working with that list and just sort of dotting them, or obviously you can do that around Massachusetts as well. I don't know. It's sort of like, yeah. Anyone else a question or comment about this topic? Berkeley Library, Massachusetts, that closes Maine. Okay, thank you. Anyone else here? Again, it's the American experience, and Andrew Carnegie, or Carnegie. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to get it right consistently. And again, it's on YouTube. You can pick it up on YouTube, and it's quite well done. I just love the ones from the 90s because they have the David Ogden Steers narration, which is something that I particularly have an ear for. So how are we doing with this topic? We covered it okay? Just thank you.
Looks this is the part that everyone wanted to hear, was the libraries. I actually found the steel stuff quite interesting myself because I didn't know anything about it. And in terms of, my library has the 3 or 4 steps. It's got the big lights at the front of our building, and no picture of Carnegie that I've noticed though.
No portrait? Was I mean, it's been inconsistent, I guess. I have another comment from Linda. I guess there's this question and answers, two portions here. Fascinating. Rockport, Massachusetts has a Carnegie Library building that's now a private home. The public library is in a former mill building. Well, and who knows what the decision making is to move from the original Carnegie Library building to something else. But they're using a former mill building. So if it's going to be in a different kind of building, that's obviously quite a tribute to that portion of our history, which is a unique portion of New England and Massachusetts, Rhode Island history. Is the mills. I do another program on the Lowell textile mills, if anyone's interested. Okay, appreciate it, Patricia. Thank you. How did Mr. Carnegie get? Oh, okay. So now we get a steel question. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. So, wow, he started off in Scotland. His father was a weaver. Weavers were being replaced by the textile mills. So they moved to America, to Pittsburgh. Carnegie worked in a factory under horrendous conditions. He made up his mind when he was 13, 14 years old. He'll do whatever it takes to, rise above this. He was a telegrapher, and he delivered messages. So this would be 15, 16 years old. And he was sharp. And he learned, he applied himself, he learned English quickly. You can kind of do that when you're 14, maybe a little bit better. And he remembered everyone's name. He would deliver the messages, and they're all being delivered to prominent people, and he remembered their names. And then he was a telegrapher. Now, remember, this was about the late 1840s, and telegraphy was brand new in on the ground floor. And at that time, there were two people taking the messages over the wire. One would record the dots and dashes, and the other would read the dots and dashes and translate it into, obviously, letters and words. Carnegie developed an ear so that he can do it all at the same time. Again, this is like in year 3 of telegraphy, not later on. So he would listen to the dots and dashes and just write it out. So, all right, he was on his way again. He was maybe 16, 17, 18 years old. And then he became a protege with the Pennsylvania Railroad. You know, the railroads used telegraphy, of course, at that time. And to this guy named Scott. Scott liked him. Scott, he just really proved himself. So he was with the railroads, being the biggest industry in the country at that time. Railroads wasn't anything else. It was the railroads. Railroads were a national industry, not just a local industry. He then went from the railroads, which obviously used a lot of steel or a lot of iron at that time, to building bridges and iron making during the Civil War. And then he eventually moved on to the steel industry. He saw saw what that was all about. And he eventually essentially was a finance guy. That's why he was in New York, arranging all the finances to grow his steel company. So, yeah, it's a real interesting story. You might have to go beyond that documentary to, maybe read a biography on him, or there's other documentaries as well. And anyway, so hopefully it wasn't too long, maybe. Why do people in Pittsburgh, including the town of Carnegie, say Carnegie? I don't know. I'm not. Someone else going to have to figure that one out. The pronunciation, but in the East we say Carnegie. So Carnegie himself said the former and not the latter. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'd have to go to Scotland for that type of really get something more. So sorry, I don't have anything more than that. And yet Carnegie Mellon, which is Pittsburgh, goes by the second pronunciation. Yeah. As you know, I'm not going to touch this one. What were the requirement a tenant would need to meet to get the grant? Yeah, it was ongoing support is really what it was. That they would use, I imagine, taxes, although I'm not quite sure about that. But be able to provide or support the operating expenses of the library, the staffing from community support. That's really what he is looking for. That wasn't just a grant, or he certainly wasn't going to make an endowment where you just live off of that. That was not what it was. He wanted. So he really was had a vision in terms of long term. Did he require libraries in the South? Okay, so yeah. So we already did that. And hold on, let me just see if there's anything else here. Not there. Okay, hold on. There's a few more here. Tell all these libraries not to change the buildings. They are beautiful. We agree. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Karen. Yeah. So I think that should be it, unless there's something else here that's popping up, and I kind of think we've covered them.
I think I think you did get them all. I want to say thank you. It looks like it was a success. Um, Interesting, the stuff you don't know, and then even the stuff that you're like, oh, I had no idea that you can recognize a Carnegie, and now I know why you can recognize a Carnegie. Um, anyway, so Rick, I appreciate it. I'm sure the other the attendees and the other hosts appreciate your time, and I'm sure that you could talk about it for ages, as can all library lovers. But it looks like everyone is done with their questions and people are saying goodbye.
All right. Thank you all for having me here. This is a great topic. I think I might have one or two or three on Zooms. I do have a Facebook page which shows you some of my other programs. As many are in person, others are on Zoom. You just type in Rick Feingold programs, and then you make your way to a Facebook page, and you'll find other
And
topics.
we will send links to the video when it's available.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right, everyone, have a good night. Hope to see you again.